Picture this. You're 8 months pregnant, living paycheck to paycheck, when your husband looks you in the eye and says, "You're trying to trap me. I'm destined for more than this. More than you." He throws $200 on the table like you're garbage he's paying to have hauled away and walks out into the rain to be with his new girlfriend, a wealthy socialite who represents everything he thinks he deserves. But here's what he doesn't know. Here's the secret that will destroy him completely. The poor barista he just abandoned? She's actually worth $3.7 billion. dollars. She's the heir to one of Silicon Valley's most powerful tech empires, and she's been living in disguise for 8 years, searching for authentic love. Now she's lost everything: her marriage, her pregnancy, her home. She's broken, homeless, and utterly alone. But when you have unlimited resources and nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous person in the world. What happens next isn't just revenge. It's a masterclass in strategic destruction that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about justice, love, and the price of betrayal. This man thinks he's trading up to a better life. He has no idea he just made the biggest mistake of his existence. By the end of this story, you'll see how a woman who was discarded like trash becomes the architect of her betrayer's complete downfall. But the real twist? The ending isn't what anyone expects. Not even her. The fluorescent bathroom light hummed overhead as Sarah Collins stared at the plastic stick in her trembling hands. Two pink lines. Unmistakable. Definitive. After 6 years of marriage, 3 years of trying, and countless negative tests that had left her sobbing on this same cold tile floor, she was finally pregnant. Sarah pressed her back against the bathroom door and slid down until she was sitting on the floor, still clutching the test. Through the thin walls of their cramped Seattle apartment, she could hear Derek on another late-night work call, his voice animated and desperate as he pitched ideas to clients who probably weren't listening. The apartment they shared was barely 800 square feet, with water stains on the ceiling and neighbors who played music too loud at all hours. The kitchen faucet leaked, the heater worked sporadically, and the windows rattled every time a truck passed on the street below. But for 6 years, Sarah had called this place home. She had made it beautiful with secondhand furniture painted bright colors, plants that somehow thrived despite the lack of natural light, and photographs from the life she and Derek had built together. What Derek didn't know, what no one in Seattle knew, was that Sarah could have bought the entire building with money from her trust fund. She was Sarah Mitchell, only child of tech billionaire Robert Mitchell, heir to a fortune worth $3.7 billion. dollars. But she had walked away from all of it when she was 22, the day after her mother's funeral, when she realized that every person in her life saw dollar signs instead of her face. She had changed her name to Sarah Collins, moved across the country, and gotten a job as a barista at Pike Place Market. She wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for who she was, not what she could buy. She wanted authenticity, genuine connection, real love that had nothing to do with stock portfolios and board meetings. Derek Peterson had been her regular customer for 3 months before he finally asked her out. He was 26 then, a junior account executive at a small marketing firm, ambitious but struggling to make his mark in Seattle's competitive business scene. He ordered the same thing every morning: large coffee, black, with an everything bagel, no cream cheese. He always left a $2 tip and made small talk about the weather or the morning news. Their first date was coffee at a different shop because Sarah felt weird about dating someone at her workplace. Derek was nervous, which she found endearing. He talked about his dreams of running his own agency someday, of creating campaigns that would change how people thought about products and brands. His eyes lit up when he spoke about advertising, and Sarah found herself falling for his passion as much as his crooked smile. They dated for 8 months before Derek proposed with a ring he had saved for 6 months to afford. Sarah said yes immediately, not because of the ring, which was modest and beautiful, but because Derek looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. When he slipped the ring on her finger in the small park where they had their first picnic, Sarah felt like she had finally found what she was looking for. Their wedding was at the courthouse, with 2 witnesses Derek borrowed from his office. Sarah's father wasn't invited because, as far as Derek knew, Sarah's parents had died in a car accident when she was 21, leaving her with no family and no inheritance. It was a lie she told to explain why she never talked about her past, why she had no childhood friends at their wedding, why she seemed to have appeared in Seattle fully formed at age 22. The first 3 years of marriage were exactly what Sarah had dreamed of when she left her father's mansion in Silicon Valley. She and Derek lived paycheck to paycheck, but they were happy. They cooked dinner together every night, watched movies on their laptop because they couldn't afford cable, and took long walks through the city because they couldn't afford entertainment. Derek would practice his presentations in their living room while Sarah listened and offered feedback. She helped him choose ties for important meetings and stayed up late when he was stressed about deadlines. Sarah worked her way up from barista to assistant manager at the coffee shop, earning just enough to cover her half of their modest expenses. She was careful never to spend more than her salary could justify, never to suggest restaurants or activities that might make Derek suspicious about her finances. She had become an expert at being authentically middle class, and she was proud of the life they had built with their own hands. But lately, things had been different. Derek had been distant, distracted, working longer hours and coming home exhausted and irritable. He talked constantly about his coworker Madison Sterling, daughter of a real estate mogul, who had joined their firm 6 months ago as a senior account executive. Madison drove a BMW, wore designer clothes, and lived in a penthouse downtown. She represented everything Derek wanted and everything Sarah was pretending not to be. Madison thinks I should ask for the Henderson account, Derek would say over dinner. Madison says I need to be more aggressive about promotions. Madison invited me to that networking event at the Four Seasons. Each mention of Madison's name felt like a small paper cut. Sarah tried to be supportive, tried to encourage Derek's ambitions, but she could see him changing. He started criticizing their apartment, calling it cramped and depressing. He complained about their budget-friendly meals, suggesting they order takeout more often. He bought expensive cologne he couldn't afford and started working out at an upscale gym across town. The pregnancy test in Sarah's hands represented everything she had wanted for the past 3 years. A baby would make their little family complete, would give their love a tangible form, would justify all the sacrifices she had made to live this authentic life. She imagined telling Derek, pictured his face lighting up with joy, saw them planning and dreaming together for their child's future. Sarah stood up slowly, tucked the test into her pocket, and walked to the living room where Derek was finally ending his call. He was sitting at their small dining table, laptop open, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, and he looked older than his 32 years. "How did the call go?" Sarah asked, settling onto the couch across from him. Derek rubbed his eyes and closed the laptop. "Morrison Industries is thinking about switching agencies. If we lose that account, Brad's going to have to make cuts. I could be out of a job by Christmas." "We'll figure it out," Sarah said automatically. "We always do." "Do we?" Derek's voice was sharp. "Sarah, look around. We're 32 and 30 years old, and we're living like college students. Our neighbors are drug dealers and grad students. The heat doesn't work half the time, and I'm pretty sure there's mold in the bathroom." Sarah felt a stab of hurt. This apartment had been their sanctuary for 6 years. They had painted the walls together, hung pictures of their travels, made love in every room. Now Derek was talking about it like it was a prison. "I know it's not perfect," she said carefully, "but it's ours. We've been happy here." "Happy?" Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, Madison Sterling spent more on her purse than we spend on rent. She drives a car that costs more than I make in 2 years. She lives in a world where people have influence, where they can make things happen with a phone call. And that's what you want? Madison's world?" Derek looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her stomach clench. It wasn't love or partnership or shared dreams. It was resentment. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Maybe I want more than this." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the pregnancy test. Her heart was racing, but she forced herself to smile. "Derek, I have something to tell you. Something wonderful." She held out the test, watching Derek's face as he processed what he was seeing. She waited for the joy, the excitement, the kiss that would make everything else disappear. Instead, Derek's face went white. He stared at the test like it was a bomb about to explode. "You're pregnant," he said flatly. "We're pregnant," Sarah corrected, her smile faltering. "We're going to have a baby." Derek stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. No, 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 Sarah, this can't happen. Not now. What do you mean it can't happen? We've been trying for 3 years. That was before I realized what my life could be, Derek said, starting to pace. Madison's father wants to meet with me next week. He's thinking about moving his company's account to our firm, and he specifically requested to work with me. Do you know what that could mean for my career? Sarah felt like she was falling. Derek, we're talking about our baby, our child. We're talking about a mistake, Derek said coldly. Sarah, I'm on the verge of everything I've ever wanted. Real success, real money, real influence. A baby now would destroy all of that. How would a baby destroy anything? People have careers and children all the time. Derek stopped pacing and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Disgust. People like Madison have careers and children. People who can afford nannies and private schools and houses with nurseries. People like us have screaming babies in studio apartments and maxed out credit cards and ruined sleep schedules. Sarah stood up, her legs shaky. People like us? Derek, we're married. We love each other. That's what matters. Love doesn't pay for diapers, Sarah. Love doesn't get me promoted. Love doesn't open doors or build networks or create opportunities. Derek's voice was getting louder. I've been killing myself at that agency for 6 years, and finally, I have a chance to break through. Madison sees potential in me. Her father sees potential in me. And you want me to throw it all away for what? A baby we can't afford in an apartment that's falling apart? I want you to remember what we promised each other, Sarah said, tears starting to fall. I want you to remember that we're supposed to be a team. Teams don't sabotage each other, Derek shot back. This pregnancy is sabotage, Sarah. You know I'm at a crucial point in my career, and you decide now is the perfect time to get pregnant? It's like you're trying to keep me trapped in this mediocre life. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had never trapped Derek. If anything, she had been the one making sacrifices, hiding her true identity, living below her means to maintain the illusion of their equal partnership. I didn't plan this, she whispered. It just happened. Well, it can just unhappen, Derek said brutally. There are options, Sarah. We're not teenagers. We can handle this like adults. Sarah stared at her husband, this man who had promised to love her in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse. The man who was now suggesting she terminate their pregnancy so he could pursue a business relationship with another woman. I'm not getting an abortion, she said firmly. Derek's jaw tightened. Then you're choosing to ruin both our lives. I'm choosing to protect our baby. It's not a baby yet. It's a collection of cells that's going to become a financial disaster. Sarah felt something break inside her chest, not just her heart, but something deeper. Her faith in the man she had married, in the life they had built, in the authenticity she had sacrificed everything to find. Get out, she said quietly. What? Get out of this apartment. Get out of my sight. I don't want to look at you right now. Derek grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. Fine. Maybe some time apart will help you think clearly about what's really important here. He headed for the door, then turned back. Sarah, I'm not the villain here. I'm trying to build a future for us. A real future. Not this fantasy you've been living where love conquers all and money doesn't matter. Grow up. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Sarah alone in the apartment that suddenly felt cavernous and cold. She sank back onto the couch, one hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. It's okay, she whispered to the baby she couldn't see yet. We'll be okay. But as she sat in the silence of her empty home, Sarah wasn't sure she believed her own words. Derek didn't come home that night. Sarah lay awake in their bed, staring at the ceiling and listening for his key in the lock. Every car door that slammed outside made her heart jump. Every footstep in the hallway made her sit up hopefully. But Derek never came. She called him the next morning, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She tried his office, but his assistant said he had called in sick. Sarah knew Derek's friends from work, but she didn't have their personal numbers. She had always been content to let Derek maintain his professional relationships separately from their home life. On the second day, Sarah called Derek's best friend Marcus, whose number she found in Derek's old address book. Sarah, hey, how are you? Marcus sounded surprised to hear from her. I'm looking for Derek. He hasn't been home in 2 days. There was a pause. Oh, Sarah, I think Derek is staying at someone else's place. He said you guys were having some problems. What kind of problems did he say we were having? Another pause, longer this time. Maybe you should talk to Derek about this. Marcus, please, I'm worried about him. Look, Sarah, I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but Derek said you were trying to trap him with a pregnancy and he needed space to figure things out. The words hit Sarah like ice water. Derek had been talking about their private business, sharing their most intimate crisis with friends and coworkers. Worse, he was painting her as the villain in their story. Did he say anything else? Sarah asked quietly. Just that he was finally getting his break at work, and you were trying to sabotage it. Sarah, I've known Derek for 10 years. He's ambitious, but he's not a bad guy. Maybe you two just want different things. After Sarah hung up, she sat on her couch and tried to process what was happening. Her husband of 6 years had abandoned her when she was pregnant, was telling people she was trying to trap him, and was apparently staying with someone else, someone who wasn't her. The third day brought a text message from an unknown number. Check Madison Sterling's Instagram. Sarah's hands were shaking as she opened the app. Madison's latest post showed her and Derek at an upscale restaurant downtown, both dressed like they were celebrating something important. Derek was wearing a suit Sarah had never seen before, and his smile was brighter than it had been in months. The caption read, "Amazing dinner celebrating new beginnings with this incredible man. Sometimes the universe removes obstacles to clear your path to destiny. Hashtag grateful, hashtag new chapter, hashtag blessed." Sarah scrolled through the comments, her nausea growing with each response. Madison's friends were congratulating her on finally finding a real man, and Derek on upgrading to someone worthy of his potential. Several people made jokes about Derek being free now, as if Sarah had been holding him prisoner. The worst part was Derek's response to the comments. He had liked every single one, including the ones that mocked his previous relationship. He had even replied to one, "Thank you. Sometimes you don't realize how much you've been settling until someone shows you what you deserve." Sarah ran to the bathroom and vomited, though she wasn't sure if it was morning sickness or pure emotional devastation. When she looked at herself in the mirror afterward, she saw a stranger. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She looked like someone who was disappearing. That afternoon, Derek finally called. "Sarah, we need to talk." His voice was different, colder, more distant than she had ever heard it. "Where are you?" Sarah asked. "I'm at Madison's place. Look, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've realized that we want fundamentally different things." "We want different things?" "Derek, 3 days ago, we were married and trying to start a family. What changed?" "I changed. Madison helped me see that I've been limiting myself, accepting less than I deserve. She believes in my potential in a way that you never have." Sarah felt like she was having an out-of-body experience. "I've supported every dream you've ever had. I've listened to your presentations, helped you choose clothes for interviews, celebrated every small success." "You've supported the small version of me," Derek said. "The version that was content with our mediocre life. But Madison sees the bigger picture. She sees what I could become if I stop settling." "And what am I in this bigger picture?" There was a long pause. "You're not in it, Sarah." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What about our baby?" "There is no baby. Not anymore. I'm not going to let an unwanted pregnancy derail my future." "It's not unwanted by me." "Then that's your choice to make. But it's not my responsibility anymore." Sarah couldn't breathe. "Derek, we're married. We made vows." "People grow apart, Sarah. People realize they made mistakes when they were young and didn't know what they really wanted." "So our entire marriage was a mistake?" "Our marriage was what I needed then. But I need something different now. Madison and her father are introducing me to people who can change my life. Real estate developers, tech executives, venture capitalists, people who can open doors I never even knew existed." "And I can't open those doors?" Derek laughed, and the sound was cruel. "Sarah, you're a coffee shop manager. You drive a 12-year-old Honda and shop at Target. You've never been to a charity gala or a country club. You don't speak the language of success." Sarah thought about the charity galas she had attended as a child, the country club where she had played tennis, the boarding schools and Ivy League connections that Derek couldn't imagine. She thought about the trust fund that could buy Derek's new friends 10 times over. But she also thought about the life she had chosen, the authenticity she had pursued, the love she had believed was real. "So what happens now?" she asked. "I'm filing for divorce. Since we don't have any real assets and you're determined to keep the pregnancy against my wishes, it should be straightforward." "Derek, please, don't do this. Don't throw away 6 years over a career opportunity." "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally picking something up." "Sarah, you're a sweet person, but you're not meant for the world I'm heading into. This is for the best." "For who?" "For both of us. You'll find someone who wants your simple life, someone who's content with mediocrity, and I'll find what I've been looking for all along." "What if you're wrong? What if Madison gets bored with you? What if her father decides you're not worth the investment?" Derek's voice turned ice cold. "That won't happen, because unlike you, Madison and I are building something real, something with substance." The irony was staggering. Derek was leaving his real wife for a performance, abandoning authentic love for the illusion of status. He was trading everything genuine in his life for a chance to play in a world where Sarah was actually royalty. "I'll send someone to get my things tomorrow," Derek continued. "And Sarah, I'd appreciate it if you didn't make this difficult. Don't call my office or try to contact Madison. We're moving forward, and you need to do the same." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, then slowly walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where they kept their important papers. Their marriage certificate was filed behind the car registration and insurance documents. It was a simple piece of paper that had once represented everything they had promised each other. Sarah pulled out the certificate and sat at their small dining table, reading the words they had spoken 6 years ago. To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse. Derek had broken every single vow in the span of 3 days. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. "Someone will be by tomorrow at 10 a.m. to collect my belongings. Please have everything packed and ready." Sarah looked around the apartment that had been their home, trying to figure out which pieces of their life belonged to whom. The couch they had bought together, the dishes they had received as wedding gifts, the photographs on the walls showing 6 years of shared memories. How do you divide a life that you thought was permanent? That night, Sarah lay in bed alone for the third time in her marriage. She pressed her hand to her stomach and tried to imagine the tiny life growing inside her. In 8 months, she would be a mother. She would bring a child into the world whose father had already abandoned them both. "I promise you," she whispered into the darkness, "I will never let anyone make you feel unwanted. I will love you enough for both of us." But even as she made the promise, Sarah wasn't sure how she was going to keep it. She had $23 in her checking account, a part-time job at a coffee shop, and a rent payment due in 2 weeks. Derek had been right about one thing. Love didn't pay for diapers. For the first time since leaving her father's fortune, Sarah wondered if pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Derek's moving crew arrived at exactly 10 o'clock the next morning. Sarah had spent the night packing his belongings into boxes, a surreal exercise in dismantling their shared life. His clothes, his books, his coffee mug, his side of the medicine cabinet. Each item felt like a small death. The 2 men Derek sent were efficient and impersonal. They loaded boxes and furniture onto their truck while Sarah sat on the couch that was apparently staying with her, since Derek had texted to say Madison's apartment was already fully furnished with better pieces. "Ma'am, what about the photos?" one of the movers asked, gesturing to the framed pictures on the walls. Sarah looked at the gallery of their relationship, their wedding day, vacations they had taken, holidays with friends, Derek's arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera like they had forever ahead of them. "Leave them," Sarah said. "He doesn't want them." After the movers left, the apartment felt cavernous and hollow. Derek had taken more than Sarah expected, including furniture she thought they had bought together. The dining table where they had eaten dinner every night for 6 years. The bookshelf they had assembled on a Sunday afternoon, laughing as they struggled with the incomprehensible instructions. The television they had saved 3 months to buy. Sarah walked through the empty rooms, cataloging what remained. Her clothes, her books, the bed they had shared, which Derek apparently didn't want because it held too many memories. The coffee maker, which he had left with a note. Seems appropriate. The cruelty of that small gesture broke something inside Sarah. Derek knew how much she loved making coffee for him every morning, knew that it had been one of her small daily expressions of love. Leaving the coffee maker behind felt like him saying that even her love was unwanted now. That afternoon, Sarah's landlord knocked on the door. "Mrs. Peterson, I need to discuss your lease situation." Sarah had forgotten that the lease was in Derek's name. Legally, she was just an occupant, not a tenant. "Mr. Rodriguez, I can explain about Derek moving out. That's actually why I'm here. Mr. Peterson came by yesterday and gave notice. Your lease expires at the end of this month." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. "He gave notice? Without telling me? He said you were separating and that you'd be moving out as well." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Peterson. I know you've been good tenants, but I need the apartment back for new renters." After Mr. Rodriguez left, Sarah sat on her bed and tried to calculate her finances. She had $23 in checking, maybe $200 in her savings account. Derek had been the primary breadwinner, and they had always lived paycheck to paycheck. She couldn't afford the apartment on her own, even if the landlord would let her stay. Sarah called the coffee shop where she worked. "Kelly, I know I'm not scheduled today, but I really need extra hours. Could I pick up some shifts?" Her manager sighed. "Sarah, honey, I've been meaning to talk to you. Business has been slow, and the owner is making me cut everyone back to part-time. I can only give you 20 hours a week maximum. 20 hours a week at $12 an hour. Before taxes, that was less than $1,000 a month." Sarah's share of the rent alone had been $800. That night, Sarah lay in bed and felt the first cramps. They started small, like menstrual cramps, but gradually got worse. Sarah tried to convince herself it was normal, just her body adjusting to pregnancy. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. By 3 in the morning, she was doubled over in pain. When she went to the bathroom and saw the blood, her worst fears were confirmed. Sarah called an Uber to take her to the emergency room, using money she couldn't afford to spend. The driver, a kind older woman, noticed she was crying and asked if she needed help. "I'm losing my baby," Sarah whispered. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Is there someone I should call for you?" Sarah thought about Derek, probably asleep in Madison's expensive bed, probably not thinking about her at all. "No, there's no one to call." The emergency room at Seattle General was busy even at 4 in the morning. Sarah sat in a plastic chair for 2 hours, bleeding and cramping and filling out forms she couldn't afford to pay for. When a nurse finally called her name, Sarah was barely conscious from pain and blood loss. Dr. Elizabeth Carter was compassionate but direct. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm sorry to tell you that you're having a miscarriage. It appears to be complete, which means your body has expelled all the pregnancy tissue. This is very common in early pregnancy, affecting about 20% of all pregnancies." "Why did this happen?" Sarah asked through her tears. "Most first trimester miscarriages are caused by chromosomal abnormalities. It's not anything you did or didn't do. Sometimes these things just happen." "Is there anyone I can call for you?" Dr. Carter asked gently. "Your husband? Family?" Sarah shook her head. "My husband left me 3 days ago when I told him I was pregnant." Dr. Carter's expression darkened. "I'm so sorry. Do you have other support? Friends? Family?" "No. No, there's no one." The doctor prescribed pain medication and gave Sarah instructions for physical recovery, but there was nothing she could do for the emotional devastation. Sarah took another Uber home, using the last of her cash, and crawled into bed. For 3 days, Sarah didn't get up except to use the bathroom. She didn't eat, barely drank water, and ignored calls from her supervisor at the coffee shop. She lay in bed and grieved for the baby she had wanted so desperately, the child who would have made their small family complete. On the 4th day, her phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. Against every instinct for self-preservation, Sarah opened it. Derek had posted a photo of himself in Madison at what looked like a charity gala. They were both dressed in expensive formal wear, posing with several people Sarah didn't recognize. Derek looked handsome and successful, his smile bright and confident. The caption read, "Incredible evening supporting the Seattle Children's Hospital with my amazing girlfriend Madison Sterling. Some people are just meant for greatness, and I'm grateful to have found someone who brings out the best in me." The irony was sickening. Derek was raising money for children's health care while Sarah had just lost their child alone in a hospital emergency room. He was celebrating his new life while she was grieving the death of their baby, but it was the comments that destroyed what was left of Sarah's composure. Madison had responded with heart emojis and "so proud of my incredible man." Friends were congratulating Derek on finding someone who deserves him and finally being with someone who supports his dreams. Several comments mocked Derek's previous relationship without naming Sarah directly. "Glad you escaped that situation," one person wrote. "Some people just want to drag you down to their level," wrote another. Derek had liked every comment, including the cruel ones. He had even responded to a few. "Thank you. Sometimes you have to learn that not everyone wants you to succeed. Finding someone who believes in your potential changes everything." Sarah threw her phone across the room, where it hit the wall and shattered. She pulled a pillow over her head and screamed until her throat was raw. The next morning brought another crisis. Sarah's landlord was at the door with an official notice. "Mrs. Peterson, you were supposed to be out yesterday. I need you to vacate the premises immediately, or I'll have to involve the sheriff's department." Sarah looked around the apartment that had been her home for 6 years, the place where she and Derek had cooked dinner together, watched movies, made love, planned their future. Now it was just empty rooms that someone else would fill with their own memories. She packed her belongings into 3 suitcases and called a taxi to take her to the cheapest motel she could find. The Sunset Inn was on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask questions about why a woman was checking in alone with everything she owned. The room smelled like cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. The carpet was stained, the wallpaper was peeling, and the heater made ominous clicking sounds. But it was $35 a night, and Sarah's credit card had just enough available credit to cover a week. She sat on the edge of the hard motel bed, surrounded by the remnants of her life, and tried to figure out what to do next. She had lost her husband, her home, her pregnancy, and almost all of her money. She was 28 years old and felt like her life was over. For the first time since walking away from her family's fortune 8 years ago, Sarah wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Pride had seemed important when she was young and idealistic. Authenticity had felt like the highest virtue when she was surrounded by people who loved her trust fund more than her personality. But sitting in a seedy motel room with $11 to her name and a broken heart, Sarah realized that pride and authenticity were luxuries she could no longer afford. She needed help, and there was only one person in the world who had the power to save her. Sarah stared at the broken pieces of her phone scattered across the motel room floor. She needed to call her father, but she had no way to contact anyone. The motel room didn't have a landline, and she couldn't afford to replace her phone. She walked to the front desk, where a bored-looking clerk was reading a paperback novel. "Excuse me, is there a payphone anywhere nearby?" The clerk looked up with surprise. "A payphone? Lady, what year do you think this is?" "I need to make a call, and my phone is broken." The clerk studied Sarah's face, taking in her red-rimmed eyes and exhausted expression. "There's a gas station 2 blocks down that might have one. Or you could use the phone here for local calls only." "I need to make a long-distance call. That'll be $5 cash only." Sarah handed over 5 of her remaining $11 and was led to an old rotary phone behind the front desk. Her father's private number was burned into her memory, even though she hadn't called it in over 2 years. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Robert Mitchell." His voice was exactly as Sarah remembered. Deep, authoritative, the sound of a man who commanded billion-dollar board meetings and never doubted his own decisions. "Dad?" Sarah's voice cracked on the single word. There was a long pause. "Sarah? Is that really you?" "Yes, it's me." "My God, where are you? I haven't heard from you in 2 years. Are you all right?" The simple question broke whatever composure Sarah had left. She started sobbing into the phone, unable to form words. "Sarah, talk to me. Are you hurt? Are you in trouble?" Through her tears, Sarah told him everything. Derek, the pregnancy, the abandonment, the miscarriage, the eviction. She told him about the motel room and her broken phone and the $11 in her pocket. She told him about feeling completely alone in the world. Robert Mitchell listened without interrupting, and Sarah could hear the controlled fury in his breathing. Where are you right now? He asked when she finished. The Sunset Inn in Seattle. It's a motel. Give me the address. I'm sending a car. Dad, you don't understand. I'm in Washington. You're in California. Sarah, I own 3 private jets. Geography isn't an obstacle. Give me the address and pack whatever you have. You're coming home. I don't know if I can. You can and you will. You're my daughter and I'm not leaving you in some seedy motel when you need help. We'll sort out everything else later. Sarah gave him the address and hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had just happened. After 8 years of refusing her father's help, after building a life specifically designed to prove she didn't need his money, she had called him at her lowest moment, and he had responded without hesitation. 2 hours later, a black sedan pulled into the motel parking lot. The driver was a professional-looking man in a suit who introduced himself as James. Miss Mitchell, I'm here to take you to the airport. Mr. Mitchell's plane is waiting. Sarah had forgotten what it felt like to have unlimited resources solve problems instantly. Within 30 minutes, she was in the back of a luxury car heading to Seattle's Boeing Field, where her father's Gulfstream G650 was fueled and ready. The flight attendant, Maria, greeted Sarah like a long-lost family member. Miss Sarah, Mr. Mitchell is so excited to see you. Are you hungry? Can I get you anything? Sarah realized she hadn't eaten in 3 days. Maria brought her soup and sandwiches and made sure she was comfortable for the 2-hour flight to San Francisco. As the plane descended over the Bay Area, Sarah looked out the window at the landscape of her childhood. Rolling hills dotted with mansions, the gleaming towers of Silicon Valley, the sprawling campuses of tech companies that had made her father's fortune. It was beautiful and familiar, and everything she had run away from. Robert Mitchell was waiting on the tarmac when the plane landed. At 65, he was still imposing. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed even at midnight. He looked exactly like Sarah remembered, except for the worry lines around his eyes that deepened when he saw her. Sarah walked down the plane's stairs and into her father's arms. He held her tightly, and for the first time since Derek left, she felt safe. Welcome home, sweetheart, he murmured into her hair. You're safe now. The drive to the family estate took 40 minutes through the hills of Silicon Valley. Sarah had forgotten how massive the property was. 50 acres of manicured grounds surrounding a modernist mansion that had been featured in Architectural Digest. The house where she had grown up felt like a museum of her former life. Your room is exactly as you left it, Robert said as they walked through the front entrance. But I thought you might prefer the guest cottage by the pool. It's more private. Sarah chose the cottage. It was larger than the apartment she had shared with Derek, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the infinity pool and gardens. The decor was elegant but comfortable, and someone had stocked the refrigerator and left fresh flowers on the dining table. Get some rest, Robert said, kissing her forehead. We'll talk tomorrow when you're feeling stronger. That night, Sarah took a hot bath in the cottage's marble bathroom and slept in a king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't worried about money or safety or where she would live tomorrow. But she also felt like a failure. She had set out to prove she could build a life without her father's money, and she had ended up exactly where she started, dependent on his wealth and protection. The next morning, Robert brought coffee and pastries to the cottage. How are you feeling? He asked, settling into a chair across from her. Like a hypocrite, Sarah said honestly. I spent 8 years proving I didn't need your help, and the moment things got difficult, I came running home. You didn't come running home at the first sign of difficulty, Robert said firmly. You survived 8 years on your own, built a life, got married, tried to start a family. The fact that you married a man with the morals of a snake doesn't reflect on your judgment. It reflects on his character. I should have seen what he was. Maybe, or maybe he hid it well. Some people are very good at pretending to be something they're not. Robert leaned forward. Sarah, I need you to understand something. When you left 8 years ago, I was angry and worried and convinced you were making a terrible mistake. But I was also proud of you. Proud? You had principles. You were willing to give up everything comfortable and easy to find something real. That takes courage. It was stupid. It was brave. And the fact that it didn't work out the way you hoped doesn't make it stupid. It makes you human. Sarah felt tears starting again. I lost the baby, Dad. Robert's expression softened. I know, I'm so sorry. I wanted that baby so much. Even after Derek left, I thought maybe I could do it alone. Be a single mother. Prove I was strong enough. You are strong enough. Losing a pregnancy doesn't make you weak. Being abandoned by your husband doesn't make you weak. Asking for help when you need it doesn't make you weak. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the morning sun reflect off the pool. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now you heal. Physically and emotionally. Take as much time as you need. And then? Robert smiled. Then you decide what kind of life you want to build next. But this time, you don't have to build it alone. The first month at the family estate passed in a blur of medical appointments, therapy sessions, and long walks through the gardens where Sarah had played as a child. Robert had hired the best doctors in the Bay Area to monitor her recovery from the miscarriage, and a therapist who specialized in grief counseling. Dr. Patricia Reeves had been treating trauma survivors for 20 years, and she didn't let Sarah wallow in self-pity. Grief is normal, Dr. Reeves said during one of their sessions, but self-blame is destructive. You didn't cause your miscarriage and you didn't cause your husband's betrayal. These things happened to you, not because of you. But I chose Derek. I married him. I trusted him. Based on the information you had at the time, he presented himself as someone worthy of trust, and you responded appropriately. The fact that he was lying isn't your fault. Slowly, Sarah began to heal. Her appetite returned. She started sleeping through the night. The crushing weight of grief lifted enough for her to function normally. But the hardest part was dealing with her damaged sense of identity. For 8 years, she had been Sarah Collins, the barista who lived an authentic life free from the complications of wealth. Now she was Sarah Mitchell again, the billionaire's daughter who had tried to play normal and failed spectacularly. I don't know who I'm supposed to be, Sarah confided to her father one evening as they walked through the rose garden. You're supposed to be yourself, Robert replied, the same person you've always been, just with a more complete understanding of the world. But which self? The heiress or the barista? Both, neither. Sarah, you're not defined by your bank account or your job title. You're defined by your character, your values, your choices. Robert stopped walking and turned to face her. You know, I've been thinking about something. Before you left, you had a degree in business from Stanford and natural instincts for strategy and negotiation. Those skills didn't disappear when you became a barista. They're still there. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to put those skills to use. Not because you need my money, but because you have something valuable to contribute. To Mitchell Technologies? To whatever interests you. The company, a startup, a nonprofit. The world is full of problems that need solving, and you have the intelligence and resources to solve them. That conversation planted a seed that grew over the following weeks. Sarah began reading business journals again, studying market trends, following startup news. She had forgotten how much she enjoyed the intellectual challenge of business strategy. After 2 months at home, Sarah felt strong enough to take on a project. Robert had been developing a new division focused on sustainable technology, and he asked Sarah to review the business plan. I need an outside perspective, he said, handing her a thick folder. Someone who understands both the technical and market sides. Sarah spent a week analyzing the plan, and she quickly identified several problems. The technology was sound, but the marketing strategy was too focused on high-end consumers. The real opportunity was in developing affordable solutions for middle-class families and small businesses. You're targeting people who can already afford to go green, Sarah explained to her father over dinner. But the bigger market is people who want to be environmentally responsible, but can't afford current solutions. Robert listened as Sarah outlined her revised strategy. Develop modular solar systems that could be purchased piece by piece. Create financing options for working families. Partner with community organizations to provide education and installation support. You want to democratize sustainable technology, Robert said. I want to make it accessible to people like Derek and me, the people I lived with for 8 years. They care about the environment, but they're choosing between paying rent and buying organic groceries. Give them a way to go solar for the same cost as their current electricity bill, and they'll sign up. Robert smiled. When can you start? Start what? Running the Sustainable Technology Division. You just outlined a billion-dollar strategy in 20 minutes. I'd be an idiot not to put you in charge of implementing it. Sarah felt a familiar thrill of intellectual excitement. Dad, I've been making coffee for 8 years. I don't know if I'm ready to run a corporate division. You graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with degrees in both business and environmental science. You speak 3 languages and you understand technology, finance, and marketing. The fact that you chose to make coffee doesn't erase your capabilities. 3 months after arriving at the estate broken and hopeless, Sarah Mitchell was named Vice President of Sustainable Innovation at Mitchell Technologies. The appointment made the tech blogs and business journals, with most articles focusing on her impressive academic credentials and her father's confidence in her abilities. What the articles didn't mention was that Sarah had learned something valuable during her 8 years away from wealth. She understood the needs and concerns of ordinary people in a way that most tech executives never would. Her first product launch was a modular home solar system that could be purchased for $200, down and $50 a month. The system paid for itself within 3 years and came with a 20-year warranty. Sarah partnered with credit unions and community organizations to provide financing and installation support. The product was an immediate success. Within 6 months, Sarah's division had sold 50,000 units and was expanding into wind power and energy storage systems. Sarah felt proud of her work in a way she hadn't experienced since leaving home. She was using her privileged position to create opportunities for people who didn't have access to traditional clean energy options. It felt like the authentic contribution she had been searching for. But her success also made her visible again. The tech world was small, and Sarah's rapid rise from unknown to corporate VP generated attention from industry publications and social media. That's when Derek called. Sarah was in her office at Mitchell Technologies reviewing quarterly projections when her assistant buzzed her. Sarah, there's a Derek Peterson on line 2. He says he's your ex-husband. Sarah stared at the phone for a long moment. She hadn't spoken to Derek in 6 months, and she had assumed he was too busy with his new life to think about her. Put him through. Sarah, is that really you? Derek's voice sounded uncertain, almost nervous. Very different from the cold confidence he had displayed when he left her. What do you want, Derek? I saw the article about your promotion in TechCrunch, Vice President of Sustainable Innovation at Mitchell Technologies. I had no idea you were related to Robert Mitchell. You never asked about my family. I know, and I realize now that was a mistake. Sarah, I've been doing a lot of thinking since we separated. Separated? Derek, you abandoned me when I was pregnant and told me I wasn't part of your future. I was going through a difficult time. The pressure at work, the financial stress, the unexpected pregnancy. I wasn't thinking clearly. Sarah almost laughed. You seemed pretty clear when you moved in with Madison and posted pictures of your new life all over social media. That was a mistake. Madison and I were not as compatible as I thought we'd be. She's very focused on surface things, status symbols, social media appearances. It's not as fulfilling as I expected. And you're calling me because seeing your success made me realize what I threw away. Sarah, we had something real. We understood each other. We wanted the same things. We wanted completely different things, Derek. That's why you left. I wanted success, and you've achieved it. You're exactly the kind of woman I should be with. Smart, accomplished, connected to the right people. We could be a power couple, Sarah. We could build something amazing together. Sarah felt a familiar rage building in her chest. Let me make sure I understand. When you thought I was poor, you left me. Now that you know I'm wealthy, you want me back. It's not about the money. It's completely about the money. Derek, you told me I wasn't good enough for your new life. You said I was holding you back from your destiny. You abandoned me when I was pregnant because you thought I was worthless. I was wrong. I can see that now. You were right the first time. We do want different things. I want authentic relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. You want transactions that advance your social status. Sarah, please, can't we at least meet for coffee? Talk about this in person? Sarah thought about the coffee shop where they had met, the morning routine they had shared, the simple happiness of making him breakfast before work. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. No, Derek, we can't. I'm not the same person you married, and you're exactly the person you always were. There's nothing to talk about. But Sarah, she hung up without letting him finish. Her hands were shaking slightly, but not from hurt or longing, from anger. Derek's call had crystallized something Sarah hadn't fully realized. She was furious. Not just hurt or disappointed, but genuinely enraged at the man who had tried to reduce her worth to her bank account, who had abandoned her when she was vulnerable and now wanted to profit from her success. For the first time since Derek left, Sarah felt like fighting back. Derek's phone call had awakened something fierce and calculating in Sarah. That night, she called her father's head of security, a former FBI agent named Marcus Torres. "Marcus, I need you to run a background check on someone, a very thorough one." "Of course, Miss Mitchell. Who are we investigating?" "My ex-husband, Derek Peterson. I want to know everything about his past relationships, his financial history, his business dealings, everything." Marcus had worked for the Mitchell family for 10 years, and he understood the importance of discretion. "How deep do you want me to go?" "Deep enough to find out if he has a pattern of targeting women with resources." Within a week, Marcus presented Sarah with a comprehensive dossier that confirmed her worst suspicions. Derek wasn't just a man who had panicked about an unplanned pregnancy. He was a predator who systematically targeted women he could exploit. His college girlfriend, Jennifer Walsh, had dropped out of Northwestern University during her junior year due to financial difficulties. According to financial records Marcus had obtained, Jennifer had co-signed for Derek's car loan and several credit cards. When Derek graduated and moved to Seattle, he defaulted on the payments, destroying Jennifer's credit and forcing her to leave school. His post-college girlfriend, Amanda Torres, had lost her apartment when Derek convinced her to put the lease in her name, then moved out without paying his share of rent for 3 months. Amanda had to declare bankruptcy and move back in with her parents. The woman Derek dated immediately before Sarah, Christina Lopez, had been even more severely victimized. Derek had convinced her to invest her life savings in a business opportunity that turned out to be non-existent. When Christina tried to get her money back, Derek threatened to sue her for defamation. "He's a serial financial abuser," Marcus explained as Sarah reviewed the files. "He identifies women with resources or good credit, establishes romantic relationships with them, then exploits their trust to access their assets. When he's extracted maximum value, he moves on to the next target." "And Madison Sterling?" "She fits the pattern perfectly. Wealthy family, access to capital, useful business connections. But there's something else you should know." Marcus handed Sarah another file. "Derek's current business isn't what it appears to be. According to the investigation, Derek's consulting company was actually a sophisticated pyramid scheme targeting military wives. Military families were perfect victims because they moved frequently, making it difficult to build local support networks or maintain long-term legal relationships. Derek had developed a business opportunity that promised military spouses they could earn thousands of dollars a month working from home, selling wellness products. For an initial investment of $5,000, they could purchase a territory and recruit other sellers. The scheme was brilliant in its cruelty. Derek specifically targeted women whose husbands were deployed, knowing they would be desperate for both income and social connection. He held presentations at hotels near military bases, using Madison's wealthy friends as fake testimonials for the success of his program. Dozens of military wives had invested their savings into Derek's scheme, only to discover that the products were overpriced and worthless, and the promised income was impossible to achieve. When they tried to get their money back, Derek's lawyers sent cease and desist letters threatening further legal action. "He's stolen approximately $2 million from military families," Marcus concluded, "and Madison Sterling's trust fund money is financing the operation." Sarah studied the photographs of Derek's victims, young women with children, struggling to make ends meet on military pay, desperately hoping for a way to contribute to their family's income. Women like she had been when Derek abandoned her. "Marcus, I want you to contact these women. Offer them legal assistance through a foundation I'm going to establish. Pro bono representation to recover their losses. That's going to be expensive litigation. I don't care what it costs. Derek destroyed these families and he's going to face consequences." But Sarah wanted more than legal justice. She wanted Derek to experience the same complete destruction he had inflicted on her and his other victims. That's when she began planning her real revenge. Sarah spent the next month carefully researching Derek's world. Madison Sterling's family owned Sterling Real Estate, one of Seattle's most prominent development companies. Derek had leveraged his relationship with Madison to gain access to high-level business opportunities and social connections he never could have reached on his own. Through her corporate contacts, Sarah learned that Derek was positioning himself as a consultant for Sterling Real Estate's latest project, a luxury mixed-use development in downtown Seattle. The project was worth $200 million and would establish Derek as a major player in the city's real estate scene. Sarah also discovered that Derek had borrowed heavily against his anticipated future earnings from the Sterling project. He had purchased an expensive condo, leased a luxury car, and was living a lifestyle that depended entirely on his continued relationship with Madison and her family. It was the perfect setup for Sarah's plan. Using Mitchell Technologies' resources and connections, Sarah began quietly positioning herself to intersect with Derek's business world. She established a new division within her company focused on sustainable urban development, with particular expertise in the Pacific Northwest market. Then she waited for the right opportunity. It came 3 months later when Sterling Real Estate announced they were accepting bids for the technology infrastructure of their downtown development project. The contract was worth $50 million and would determine whether the development became a showcase for sustainable urban technology or just another luxury building. Sarah's team submitted a proposal that was technically superior and financially competitive with any other bidder. But more importantly, Sarah had something her competitors didn't: the full backing of Mitchell Technologies' reputation and resources. When Sterling Real Estate announced that Mitchell Technologies had won the contract, Derek's role as a consultant became suddenly much less valuable. Sarah had effectively inserted herself into his most important business relationship, but she wasn't finished. Sarah's real plan was just beginning. Through her corporate intelligence network, Sarah learned that Derek was planning to propose to Madison at a charity gala the following month. The engagement would cement his position within the Sterling family and guarantee his financial security. Sarah decided it was time to make her move. The Seattle Tech Innovation Gala was the city's premier networking event, drawing entrepreneurs, investors, and industry leaders from across the Pacific Northwest. Sarah arrived as the keynote speaker, representing Mitchell Technologies' expansion into the Seattle market. She had planned her appearance carefully. The simple but elegant black dress was designer but understated. Her jewelry was minimal but expensive. She looked like exactly what she was: a successful executive who belonged in any room she entered. Derek and Madison were among the first people Sarah saw when she walked into the ballroom. They were standing near the champagne reception, Derek in a tuxedo that was clearly new, and Madison in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Derek saw her first. Sarah watched the color drain from his face as he recognized her, his champagne glass freezing halfway to his lips. She could see him trying to process how the barista he had abandoned was now the evening's keynote speaker. Madison followed Derek's gaze and frowned. "Who is that woman? You look like you've seen a ghost." "That's my ex-wife," Derek said quietly. "Your ex-wife?" Madison's voice rose. "The waitress. Derek, what is she doing here?" "I don't know." Sarah approached them with the confidence of someone who owned the room. "Derek, Madison, what a pleasant surprise." "Sarah?" Derek's voice was strained. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm the keynote speaker," Sarah said smoothly. "Mitchell Technologies is expanding our sustainable development division to the Pacific Northwest. I'll be overseeing our Seattle operations personally." Madison was staring at Sarah with obvious confusion. "Mitchell Technologies? You're Sarah Mitchell?" "I am. But Derek said you were a coffee shop manager." Sarah smiled coldly. "I was. I chose to work in service industry to experience life outside the tech bubble. It was very educational." "You mean you were slumming?" Madison said with obvious disdain. "I mean I was learning about real people with real problems. The kind of people Derek has been stealing from with his military wives' pyramid scheme." Derek's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your consulting business, Derek. The one where you convince military spouses to invest their life savings in worthless wellness products. The one that's currently under FBI investigation for fraud." Sarah had been bluffing about the FBI investigation, but she could see from Derek's expression that she had hit close to the truth. Madison turned to Derek with alarm. "What is she talking about? What pyramid scheme?" "Sarah's obviously confused," Derek said quickly. She's probably still upset about our divorce and trying to cause problems. Actually, I'm trying to solve problems, Sarah said. For the 47 military wives you've defrauded out of approximately $2 million. dollars. They'll be getting their money back, by the way. My foundation is handling their legal representation. Your foundation? Derek's voice cracked. The Women's Economic Empowerment Foundation? We specialize in helping women who've been financially abused by their partners. Sarah turned to Madison. You might want to look into your trust fund transactions, Madison. I suspect you'll find that Derek has been using your money to finance his fraud operation without your knowledge. Madison's eyes widened with horror. Derek, is this true? Madison, don't listen to her. Sarah is lying because she's jealous of what we have together. What you have together is a business relationship, Sarah said. Derek isn't in love with you, Madison. He's in love with your bank account, just like he was with mine when he thought I had money. That's not true, Derek protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Derek, when did you first start paying attention to Madison? Was it before or after you learned about her family's wealth? Madison was studying Derek's face with new suspicion. Derek, answer her. Madison, you know I love you for who you are. Do I? Because now that I think about it, you became very interested in me right after my father mentioned our family's net worth at that company dinner. Sarah could see Madison's worldview shifting in real time. The romantic narrative Derek had constructed was crumbling under scrutiny. Madison, Derek has a pattern, Sarah continued. He targets women with resources, establishes romantic relationships with them, then exploits their trust to access their assets. I have documentation of at least 3 previous victims. Sarah, stop, Derek said desperately. You're making a scene. No, Derek. You made a scene when you abandoned your pregnant wife because you thought she was too poor to be worth your time. I'm just cleaning up the mess. Madison was backing away from Derek, her face pale with realization. Oh my God, the business loan you asked for last month, the credit cards you wanted me to co-sign. Derek, have you been using me? Madison, I can explain. Explain what? That everything Sarah is saying is true? That you're a con artist who targets wealthy women? Derek grabbed Madison's arm. Madison, please, don't let her destroy what we have. What we have is over, Madison said, pulling away from him. Security. 2 uniformed guards appeared immediately. This man is harassing me, Madison told them. Please escort him out. Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us, one of the guards said to Derek. As Derek was being led away, he turned back to Sarah with a look of pure hatred. This isn't over, Sarah. You can't destroy me without destroying yourself. Watch me, Sarah replied. After Derek was removed from the gala, Sarah delivered her keynote speech about sustainable urban development and the importance of corporate responsibility. The audience gave her a standing ovation, completely unaware of the personal drama that had just unfolded. But Sarah's confrontation with Derek was only the beginning. Over the next week, Madison Sterling discovered the full extent of Derek's deception. Her trust fund had been depleted by $200,000 in business investments that didn't exist. Her credit cards had been maxed out with purchases Derek had claimed were for their shared benefit, but had actually been for his personal use. Madison immediately hired lawyers to freeze Derek's assets and recover her stolen funds. She also provided evidence to federal investigators about Derek's pyramid scheme, finally triggering the FBI investigations Sarah had only been bluffing about. But the most devastating blow to Derek came when Madison held a press conference announcing the end of their relationship and warning other wealthy women about his predatory behavior. Derek Peterson is a con artist who specifically targets women with financial resources, Madison told reporters. He used false romantic relationships to steal money from myself and numerous other victims. I encourage any woman who has been involved with him to contact authorities immediately. The press conference was covered by every major news outlet in Seattle. Derek's photograph was broadcast across the city as a suspected fraudster and predatory con man. Within 24 hours, Derek had lost his girlfriend, his business relationships, his income, and his reputation. He was facing federal fraud charges and multiple civil lawsuits from his victims. Sarah watched it all unfold from her corner office at Mitchell Technologies' new Seattle headquarters. She felt no satisfaction in Derek's destruction, only a cold sense of justice being served. Derek had taught her that some people viewed relationships as transactions and partners as resources to be exploited. Now he was learning what happened when those transactions were reversed. The news of Derek's exposure as a con artist spread quickly through Seattle's business and social circles. The same blogs and social media accounts that had once celebrated his relationship with Madison Sterling now dissected his history of financial abuse and fraud. Sarah watched the coverage from her office, noting how quickly public opinion had shifted. Derek went from being seen as a romantic success story to being reviled as a predatory manipulator. The narrative that had once portrayed him as a hardworking man who had overcome his humble origins was rewritten to emphasize his pattern of exploiting vulnerable women. 3 days after the gala, Sarah's assistant buzzed her with an unexpected call. "Sarah, there's a Christina Lopez online too. She says Derek Peterson stole money from her, and she saw the news coverage." Christina was the woman Derek had dated before Sarah, the one who had lost her life savings to his fake business opportunity. Sarah had been hoping she would reach out. "Christina, thank you for calling. I've been hoping to speak with you. Is it true what they're saying on the news? That Derek has been running some kind of scam targeting military wives?" "It's true, and I know he stole money from you too, before we were married." Christina's voice broke. $28,000, my entire savings account. I was 25 years old and thought I was investing in our future together. I'm so sorry, I had no idea when I married him, or I would have warned you. How did you figure it out? Sarah explained her investigation, Marcus's research, and the pattern of exploitation they had uncovered. She also explained about the Women's Economic Empowerment Foundation and their offer of free legal representation. "We want to help you recover your money," Sarah said, "and we want to make sure Derek faces consequences for what he did to you and the other women." Over the next week, Sarah was contacted by 6 of Derek's previous victims. Their stories were remarkably similar. Derek had identified women with savings or good credit, established romantic relationships with them, then systematically drained their resources before disappearing. Jennifer Walsh, the college girlfriend who had been forced to drop out of Northwestern, was now a single mother working 2 jobs to support her daughter. Amanda Torres, who had lost her apartment, was still living with her parents and struggling to rebuild her credit. Christina Lopez had never fully recovered financially from Derek's theft and was working as a waitress while trying to pay off debt. Sarah arranged for each woman to receive legal representation and financial counseling through her foundation. More importantly, she helped them organize as a group to support each other and pursue justice collectively. "Derek counted on us being isolated and ashamed," Christina told Sarah during one of their phone calls. "He knew we'd be too embarrassed to tell people we'd been conned by someone we trusted." "That's how predators operate," Sarah agreed. "They rely on their victims' shame and silence. But we're not staying silent anymore." The group of Derek's victims became a powerful force for exposing financial abuse in romantic relationships. They appeared on local news programs, wrote articles for women's magazines, and spoke at conferences about recognizing the warning signs of financial predators. Their advocacy led to changes in state law that made it easier to prosecute romantic fraud and recover stolen assets. They also inspired other women to come forward with their own stories of financial abuse. Derek, meanwhile, was facing the consequences of his decades of predatory behavior. The FBI investigation had uncovered evidence of mail fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering related to his military wife's pyramid scheme. He was arrested at his luxury condo and charged with multiple federal crimes. Madison Sterling had successfully frozen his assets and recovered most of her stolen money. But Derek's other victims faced a more difficult process. His pyramid scheme had generated millions of dollars, but most of it had been spent on his lavish lifestyle or hidden in offshore accounts. Sarah used her resources to hire forensic accountants who tracked down Derek's hidden assets and helped his victims recover at least partial compensation for their losses. It wasn't everything they were owed, but it was more than they had ever expected to see again. The criminal trial became a media sensation. Derek's defense attorney tried to portray him as a victim of ambitious women who had used him for his business connections. But the evidence was overwhelming. 47 military wives testified about his pyramid scheme, and 6 former girlfriends described his pattern of financial abuse. Sarah was called as a witness to testify about Derek's behavior during their marriage. She described how he had hidden his true financial situation, abandoned her when she was pregnant, and then tried to reconcile when he learned about her wealth. Derek Peterson doesn't form romantic relationships, Sarah told the jury. He forms business partnerships with women who don't realize they're the product being sold. Derek was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge noted that his crimes had caused immeasurable financial and emotional harm to dozens of victims who trusted him with their hearts and their futures. After the trial, Sarah felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for all of Derek's victims. The man who had tried to reduce women to their financial value was now paying the price for his cruelty. But Sarah's greatest satisfaction came from the positive changes that had emerged from the tragedy. Her foundation had helped hundreds of women escape financially abusive relationships and rebuild their independence. The legal reforms they had advocated for were protecting other potential victims, and the group of Derek's former girlfriends had become lifelong friends who supported each other through their recovery. You know what's funny? Christina told Sarah during a phone call on the anniversary of Derek's conviction. I spent years thinking I was stupid for trusting him, but now I realize the problem wasn't that we trusted him. The problem was that he wasn't worthy of our trust. Exactly, Sarah agreed. Our capacity for love and trust isn't a weakness. It's what makes us human. Derek never understood that. He thought everything was a transaction. And that's why he lost everything that actually mattered. Sarah had learned that revenge wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about building something so meaningful that their cruelty became irrelevant. She had found her purpose in protecting other women from predators like Derek, and that work brought her more satisfaction than any personal vendetta ever could. 2 years after Derek's conviction, Sarah was preparing for the annual conference of the Women's Economic Empowerment Foundation when her assistant buzzed her with an unexpected call. Sarah, there's a Jackson Hayes on line 3. He says he's calling about the foundation's legal work. Sarah smiled. Jackson Hayes had been her childhood friend and next-door neighbor when they were growing up in Silicon Valley. His father had been her father's business partner, and they had played together as children before losing touch when Sarah left for college. Jackson, is that really you? Sarah Mitchell, I should have known you were behind the foundation that's been making waves in the legal community. Jackson had become a civil rights attorney, specializing in financial crimes and victim advocacy. He had been following the foundation's work and was impressed by their success in recovering assets for fraud victims. I'm calling because I have a client who could benefit from your services, Jackson continued, but I also wanted to congratulate you on what you built. The foundation is doing incredible work. They talked for an hour about their respective careers, their shared memories of growing up together, and their current work. Jackson was representing a group of elderly investors who had been defrauded by a fake cryptocurrency scheme, and he thought the foundation's forensic accounting team could help track down the stolen funds. Would you like to meet for coffee to discuss the case? Jackson asked. I'm going to be in San Francisco next week. Sarah found herself looking forward to seeing Jackson again with an anticipation that surprised her. They met at a small cafe in the Mission District, far from the corporate environments where they both usually worked. Jackson had grown into a handsome man with kind eyes and an easy smile. He was passionate about his work protecting vulnerable people from financial predators, and Sarah found herself drawn to his genuine commitment to justice. You know, I followed your story in the news, Jackson said as they lingered over their second cups of coffee. What happened with your ex-husband? I'm sorry you went through that. Thank you. It was difficult, but it led me to work that I find meaningful. You turned a personal tragedy into a force for helping other people. That takes remarkable strength. Sarah felt a familiar warmth at Jackson's words, but it was different from the desperate need for validation she had felt with Derek. This was the comfort of being truly seen and appreciated by someone who knew her history and character. They began working together on Jackson's case, and their professional collaboration naturally evolved into a personal friendship. Jackson was everything Derek had never been, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions, supportive of her career success, and committed to using his privileges to help others. You know what I like about you? Jackson told her one evening as they worked late in the foundation's office. You never forgot where you came from, even when you were trying to escape it. What do you mean? You grew up with every privilege imaginable, but you understand what it's like to struggle because you chose to experience it. That's rare among people in our world. Sarah realized that Jackson was right. Her years as Sarah Collins, struggling to pay rent and living paycheck to paycheck, had given her perspective that most wealthy people never gained. She understood both worlds and could navigate between them authentically. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally, without the desperation and neediness that had characterized her marriage to Derek. Jackson loved her for who she was, not what she could provide him. 6 months after they reconnected, Jackson asked Sarah to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in North Beach. Over wine and pasta, he told her about his work representing victims of elder abuse, his plans to expand his practice to include more financial crime cases, and his admiration for what she had accomplished with the foundation. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," Jackson said as they shared dessert. "I've been thinking about you a lot, not just as a colleague or an old friend." Sarah felt her heart skip, but in a good way this time. "I've been thinking about you too. I know you've been through a lot with your ex-husband. I don't want to rush anything or pressure you, but I'd like to see where this could go, if you're interested." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm interested." Their relationship was everything Sarah had dreamed of when she first left her father's world in search of authentic love. Jackson knew about her wealth but wasn't intimidated or corrupted by it. He had his own successful career and his own sense of purpose. They were equals in every way that mattered. A year later, Jackson proposed during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. They were walking through a vineyard at sunset when he got down on one knee. "Sarah Mitchell, you're the strongest, most compassionate, most intelligent woman I've ever known. You've turned your pain into purpose and your privilege into service. Will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful but modest, exactly what Sarah would have chosen for herself. When she said yes, Jackson spun her around and kissed her as the sun set behind the rolling hills. They were married 6 months later in a ceremony at the Mitchell family estate. Unlike Sarah's first wedding, this one was surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported them. Derek's victims, now close friends, served as bridesmaids. Jackson's law partners and Sarah's foundation colleagues filled the chairs. Robert Mitchell walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become," he whispered to Sarah as they reached the altar. "Your mother would be too." The wedding was featured in several magazines, but not as a society spectacle. Instead, it was celebrated as the union of two advocates who had dedicated their lives to protecting vulnerable people from financial predators. During their honeymoon in Italy, Sarah and Jackson talked about their shared dreams for the future. They wanted to expand the foundation's work internationally, create new legal protections for fraud victims, and maybe start a family of their own. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah said as they walked along the Amalfi Coast. "When Derek left me, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never trust anyone again, never feel safe in a relationship. And now? Now I realize that Derek's betrayal taught me what real love looks like by showing me what it isn't. Real love doesn't try to diminish you or control you or reduce you to your usefulness." Jackson stopped walking and pulled her into his arms. "Real love celebrates who you are and supports who you're becoming." Exactly. 9 months after their wedding, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Emma. Holding her daughter for the first time, Sarah felt the same fierce protective love she had experienced during her brief pregnancy with Derek, but this time it was paired with joy instead of fear. Emma would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved unconditionally. She would never doubt her worth or wonder if her father saw her as a burden or an obligation. She would have two parents who respected each other and worked together to make the world better. 5 years after Derek's conviction, Sarah was preparing for the Foundation's annual gala when her assistant brought her an unexpected piece of mail. "This came to your personal attention," her assistant said, handing her an envelope with a prison return address. The letter was from Derek. Sarah stared at the envelope for a long moment, then opened it. Derek's handwriting was the same, but his tone was very different from the arrogant man who had abandoned her 8 years earlier. "Dear Sarah," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you throw this away without reading it, but I needed to try to say something I should have said years ago. I'm sorry. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, not just to you, but to all the women I hurt. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't undo the damage or give back the years of pain I caused. But I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. I spent my whole life thinking that people were either winners or losers, that relationships were competitions where someone had to come out on top. I thought love was something you earned by being successful enough or valuable enough. I was wrong about everything. I heard about your foundation and the work you're doing to help women like the ones I hurt. I also heard about your marriage and your daughter. I'm glad you found happiness. You deserve so much better than what I gave you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I know you don't owe me anything. I just wanted you to know that the person who hurt you so badly is gone. Prison and therapy and facing the consequences of my actions changed me in ways I didn't think were possible. I hope your daughter grows up knowing how lucky she is to have you as a mother. And I hope you know that the love you're capable of giving was never wasted, even when it was given to someone who couldn't appreciate it. I'm truly sorry for everything, Sarah. You were always too good for me, but not because of money or status, because of who you are as a person. Derek. Sarah read the letter twice, then set it aside. She felt surprisingly little emotion about it, neither anger nor satisfaction. Derek's apology was probably genuine, but it also didn't matter anymore. He had become irrelevant to her life and happiness. That evening, Sarah stood at the podium of the Seattle Convention Center, addressing a crowd of 800 people at the Foundation's annual gala. The organization had grown beyond anything she had imagined when she started it, with chapters in 30 states and partnerships with law enforcement agencies across the country. 5 years ago, this foundation was born from personal pain, Sarah told the audience. I was a victim of financial abuse who wanted to make sure other women didn't suffer the same betrayal and abandonment I experienced. But what started as a response to one man's cruelty has become something much larger. A movement to protect vulnerable people from all forms of economic exploitation. She gestured to the crowd, which included Derek's former victims, now successful advocates and businesswomen in their own right. Christina Lopez had used her foundation grant to start a financial literacy nonprofit. Jennifer Walsh had returned to college and was now a social worker specializing in domestic abuse cases. Amanda Torres had become a successful real estate agent and was running for city council. The women who inspired this foundation didn't let one person's betrayal define their worth or limit their potential, Sarah continued. They turned their pain into purpose, their victimization into advocacy, their isolation into community. They proved that we are never defined by how others treat us, but by how we choose to respond. In the audience, Sarah could see Jackson holding 2-year-old Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her father's arms. Robert Mitchell was there too, beaming with pride at his daughter's accomplishments. The foundation's staff and volunteers filled dozens of tables, all united by their commitment to protecting others from the kind of predatory behavior Derek had represented. When someone betrays your trust, steals your resources, or abandons you in your time of need, it's natural to want revenge, Sarah said. But I've learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so meaningful that their cruelty becomes irrelevant to your happiness. The audience gave her a standing ovation, but Sarah's attention was focused on her family. Emma had woken up and was reaching for her mother with sleepy arms. Jackson was smiling at Sarah with the same love and admiration she saw in his eyes every day. After the gala, as they drove home through the Seattle streets where Sarah's nightmare had begun 8 years earlier, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Derek hadn't left you? Jackson asked, reading her thoughts. Sometimes, Sarah admitted. I think I would have spent my whole life trying to be someone I wasn't, hiding my true identity to maintain a relationship with someone who could never really love me. And Emma. Sarah looked back at their daughter, sleeping peacefully in her car seat. Emma wouldn't exist, and neither would the foundation or any of the good that came from my pain. Do you think Derek's letter was sincere? Sarah considered the question. Probably, but it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not angry with Derek because I'm too busy being grateful for everything I have now. That's very generous of you. It's not generous, it's practical. Anger is expensive, and forgiveness is free. I'd rather spend my energy building the life I want than mourning the life I lost. They pulled into the driveway of their home, a beautiful but not ostentatious house in a family-friendly neighborhood. It was the kind of place Sarah had dreamed of when she first married Derek. warm, welcoming, filled with love and laughter. As Jackson carried sleeping Emma to her room and Sarah checked the security system and turned off the lights, she felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. She had taken the worst experience of her life and transformed it into a force for protecting others. She had found authentic love with someone who valued her for who she truly was. She had created a family based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Standing in Emma's doorway, watching her daughter sleep, Sarah made the same promise she had made to her unborn child 8 years earlier. I will never let anyone make you feel unwanted. I will love you enough for all the people who can't. But this time, Sarah knew she could keep that promise. Emma would grow up surrounded by love, security, and parents who demonstrated daily what healthy relationships look like. She would never doubt her worth or settle for someone who tried to diminish her value. The story that had begun with Derek's cruelty had ended with Sarah's triumph, not over him, but over the pain he had caused. She had proven that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by what we choose to do next. And Sarah had chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of her broken heart. As she turned off Emma's nightlight and headed to her own bedroom, where Jackson was waiting for her, Sarah smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others, new moments of joy with her family. Derek was serving year 7 of his 12-year sentence, but Sarah rarely thought about him anymore. He had become a footnote in her story, not its defining chapter. The woman who had once been discarded like trash had become a force for justice, a loving wife and mother, and a leader who used her privilege to protect the vulnerable. That transformation was her true revenge, living so well that her enemy's cruelty became irrelevant. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your opponents, but building a life so meaningful that their attacks can't touch what really matters. Sarah had found her peace, and it was worth more than any revenge could ever be. If this story of ultimate justice and transformation moved you, if you believe in the power of turning your worst moments into your greatest victories, then let's build something incredible together. Hit that like button if you felt the satisfaction of watching someone get exactly what they deserved. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it when she lost everything? When she revealed her true identity? Or when karma finally caught up with him? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by how others treat them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that the people who discard us simply aren't worthy of what we have to offer. And if you want more stories about people who turn their pain into power, who transform betrayal into triumph, then subscribe and ring that notification bell. Because the human spirit's capacity to rebuild from nothing and create something beautiful from the ashes, that's the most powerful force in the world. Your story isn't over. Your comeback is always possible. And sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building a life so amazing that your enemies become irrelevant to your happiness. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, remember, you are never defined by what happens to you, but by what you choose to do next.